so people can understand the basis for some of these recommendations that you're all hearing. And I could answer some questions applying some of the deeper science than you usually hear, you know, for the general public on some of these media and reliable websites. So I did want to start off. I want to make a few general comments that I think are super important, and then Kristen will go to the questions. I just want to say that we are still in the exponential upswing of the disease. The disease is called COVID-19. It stands for coronavirus infectious disease 2019. The virus that causes the pathogenesis behind COVID-19 is SARS coronavirus 2. This virus is 87% similar genetically to SARS that broke out in 2004, also in Asia, as you all know. And that similarity is actually guiding us quite a bit. The more we learn, the more we see that indeed SARS-2 is a lot like SARS-1 in many important respects. It's also different. There's differences. And I will say that the differences can be very meaningful, and we're still in a place where the true answer to a lot of the questions that have come in is we don't know for sure. And even my own judgment about certain things has been changing over the past couple of weeks as new evidence comes in. I will say that all the journals are generally sharing coronavirus articles for free. I daily visit the New England Journal of Medicine. We're fast tracking research results, you know, out to the public, out to the CDC and the World Health Organization. And I think this is a wonderful testament to how far we've come. You can see my sign from the Science March some years ago, where I wrote "Science equals human progress." And many of you have heard that this is the worst pandemic since 1918, influenza. And that's true. And a lot of the learning that came from that is helping us today, as well as learning from other outbreaks of disease, epidemic, and pandemic throughout the 20th century. I can also say, just to put in historical context, in 1918, we didn't even know what was causing influenza. We had only discovered that humans have viruses 17 years earlier. We did not discover H1N1 viruses. We didn't discover the influenza virus until the 1930s. So just imagine, if we had had a virus of this transmissibility with as little knowledge as we had in 1918 when the human population was only 1.12 million, imagine how serious that would be today. But it's not, because of science, because of everything that we've learned. And I may go into I have some sites saved, I have some information saved on my desktop, and I may come to some of these in response to questions or just to share some information. But we're never going to have 1918 again, in my view, because of everything we've learned. We are, as I said, we're in an exponential uptick. It took 3 months for the first 100,000 cases, 12 days for the next 100,000 cases, and approximately 7 days for the following 100,000 cases. So we're still on the way up. And this is why it's so important to take the physical distancing recommendations very, very seriously. So I'll stop here, and then, you know, Kristen will feed me questions, and I may go into some slides or some websites to kind of help answer those. But I will also share some resources with her, and she can post them on her with the Facebook Live or the Facebook not live, but later when
Yes.
she posts the webinar.
And I almost forgot to record, but we're recording now. So
okay, great. So we're recording. It's all good. It's all
it's
good.
all work in progress.
Yeah, we're here to answer questions and just
Great. And also just, I see Lisa's already written a question in the Q&A. We can write a question in there or in the chat. If you're having a hard time hearing or something like that, please let us know. We want this to be a good user experience for everybody. So let's have some fun learning. So it's really cool because we've got people here from all over the world. The UK, I see Tina's here from St. Louis. Eric's here from Ghana. I know that Elizabeth is driving from Savannah up to Pittsburgh, so I don't know exactly where she is. Luann LaRoche, another BLER, is in South Carolina, near Hilton Head. So this is fun. I love it. I'm in Santa Monica, California. So any questions, just put it in the chat. I see some other questions coming in. And as I said, we will try to get to all of those questions. If you sent me your questions on email, I have those as well. So Karen, I'm going to start now with a couple of just sort of questions that will frame this conversation. And then I'm going to go to the specific questions from the people that have joined us.
Okay.
When did we first see this virus?
Okay, the first cases of the virus were reported in Wuhan in mid-November. And unfortunately, the Chinese government didn't do well. I think we've all seen how those trying to sound the alarm were silenced. The Chinese government tried to cover it up for a little while, and that lost us valuable time. By the time it was taken seriously, we're already looking at, mid to late January. So we've had this virus circulating in humans since approximately mid-November. So our guess is this virus jumped out of an animal and into humans sometime last November.
And where did it come from?
Okay, now this is where I'm going to share my screen and I'll tell you what we think. We don't know, okay? The honest answer is we don't completely know, but we have some guesses, okay? Now, what you're seeing on this screen, can you see my screen okay now? You see 3 animals here? Okay, Kristen, you're muted, so unmute yourself. Can you see the animals?
Yeah, I can see it. And for those of you who aren't used to Zoom, sometimes in order to see the screen share, you have to hit the Zoom icon on the bottom of your computer screen or Alt Tab back to it. Sometimes it blanks it out and then you have to go back to the screen, just so you know.
Okay, so the evolutionary reservoir that we think SARS-2 came out of is the horseshoe bat. Coronaviruses, many of them came from bats, but we don't eat bats. They don't generally bite us. They usually pass through an intermediate host. Now we know the intermediate host, you can see on the top right of the screen, was the palm civet cat for SARS-1. There has been some speculation that the pangolin is an intermediate host for SARS-2. It could also be the cat. The honest answer is we don't know yet. These two are not natural reservoirs. We are still examining all of this. Suffice it to say that both influenza 1918 and SARS-2 are pretty recent jumps into the human population. And when something just recently jumps, it's more severe. So that's why 1918 was devastating, and that's why this virus is devastating, because we don't have any natural immunity. And we honestly think that all of these nasty coronaviruses, SARS virus, SARS-1, SARS-2, and MERS, which is also a coronavirus, we think these are relatively new viruses, period, that they have only existed in the last 30 years. Now, some viruses go back millennia, but not these. These are new, and particularly new to the human population.
Okay, those visuals were good. Thank you for that. Um, what are the symptoms?
Okay, so I think you've all seen the symptoms, and this is where I'm going to go to another slide to illustrate this a little bit better. The symptoms are cough, fever, respiratory distress, difficulty breathing, shortness of breath. Now, the symptoms, there can be a range of presentations. We've also recently learned that coronaviruses often can be gut viruses, gastrointestinal. So we are now learning that there are some presentations that look like diarrheal disease, and these can be kind of confounding. The key issue for any symptomatic presentation has to do with where the virus is replicating and what tissues it's actually attacking. And we can come back and talk about what dictates this next, but I want to show you a little something here. Okay, I'm sharing again. Okay, great. So I want to come to, okay. Yeah, I have to agree to share. I'm back in my little presentation, and I want to come to this. Let's go back. Okay, here we are. Now, if you can look at the slide, as you can see, there's a range of symptoms for this coronavirus disease that range from mild to moderate to severe and critical. The vast majority of people are not going to be very sick. 80% are going to have mild or moderate illness. Now, as we've heard, there are cases of severe and critical illness that, can have some unfavorable outcomes. And these are older people and people who have underlying lung, heart disease, or diabetes. Very few mild and moderately ill people are going to progress all the way to this death outcome, particularly if they're healthy. Most everyone is going to have a mild disease. Now, this is not to underestimate how severe this can become. And I think people have probably seen the warning symptoms. Extreme emergency symptoms basically involve difficulty, inability to breathe, severe respiratory distress. And if you're having that, this is an emergency situation. I mean, any inability to breathe, turning blue, that kind of thing, immediately seek emergency care. That, regardless of whether coronavirus is causing it. Difficulty breathing, severe chest pains, these are emergency situations you should respond to as fast as you can in whatever, processes are available in your country. For now, if you feel ill, like many of us have a cough, a mild fever, cold-like symptoms, and we're wondering, wow, is this coronavirus? Well, what you should do is monitor yourself, okay? Take your temperature, monitor your symptoms. If you're suspecting, if you know you had an exposure, just monitor yourself, watch what's happening. And as things progress, if things get serious, call your health provider and take the next steps. Generally speaking, mild and moderate cases, most of them can be treated at home. Most people who are sick with coronavirus are at home. And these are the cases that really need to be hospitalized immediately. So let me just give you some sense of the incubation period. We believe, and again, do we know these things for sure? As information comes in, we'll be able to refine this better. The incubation period is between 1 and 14 days. So that means if you got an exposure, you can expect to see symptoms between 1 and 14 days later, with a median time of 5 days. Now, as you've all heard, people can be infected and even be shedding the virus a little before they really know that they're sick. That is true as far as we know. We believe that the peak of shedding virus happens right after you feel ill. You're starting to really say, oh, I'm sick. So luckily, although there is asymptomatic shedding, it's worse after you know you're sick. So it's especially important that if you're sick, you're not mixing with other people, you're staying home, you're social distancing, in the house. Now, if you've got coronavirus, and I have several friends at home with coronavirus, they're reporting to me that it's hell, it's a bad flu, and they're unhappy, but they're recovering. So mild cases, you can generally expect that you're recovered in about 2 weeks. And for severe or critical disease, that can take 3 to 6 weeks recovery time. Again, this is today's knowledge. This can change, but that's what we think we know so far.
It's great information, Karen. Thanks. So a couple of questions to follow up on that is, in terms of self-monitoring, like you pulled out the thermometer, what else can people do to self-monitor? I just got a question about, are blood oxygen saturation levels an indication? If people test that, does that indicate anything?
Honestly, I am not, again, I don't want to get too much into medical things because that is not my area of expertise.
No.
I am not monitoring my oxygen saturation. Now, people with underlying lung disease who might be doing that, I would not have those things in my house because why would I? I don't
Right.
have any reason to believe that's a problem for me. If you do, you should by all means be interacting with your healthcare provider. As I said, ordinary healthy people who were doing fine and weren't thinking about this at all the day before it really kind of exploded, and more, we're okay, are probably without underlying disease. You should monitor the symptoms that have been identified as symptoms of the coronavirus: the fever, the cold, the coughing, I've heard people say the cough can be really constant, that you're coughing a lot. And we have seen that diarrhea is potentially in the mix now in some cases. We are evaluating the fecal oral route, but I think if you're having serious breathing problems, that is an emergency situation, whether it's coronavirus or not, and you should really seek emergency care.
Okay. I'm just going to look over here in the chat to see what kind of questions we have that are just coming up here.
While you're looking, I'll just mention that a lot of people have been reaching out to me with these kind of crazy hold your breath tests and stuff that's circulating on social media. The test that is used to determine if you have SARS-2 coronavirus is a genetic test. What the provider will do is take a long Q-tip and put it into the nasopharynx, which is like the back of the nose, just getting into, the pharynx there, and, take a swab and then do a reverse transcriptase PCR. What that is, it tests to look for the presence of viral genetic material. That is how you can tell you've been infected. Now, in general, what are infections? All of us know that we have an amazingly strong immune system, and we are exposed to pathogens of all nature often. And many times we are exposed, our immune system defeats it, we don't even get clinically ill. It's always a battle between the pathogen and the human immune system. And when you have clinical symptoms, it's because the pathogen has won, okay? And we ourselves have more bacterial cells in our body than human cells. So there are bacteria that are symbiotic with us. There are bacteria helping us. We don't have to defeat every pathogen, with medical treatment. Our immune system can do it fairly well. And as we've all heard, there are probably more coronaviruses, cases, COVID-19 cases out there than we've detected, because we haven't been sampling. Not that many people have been tested so far. But what that does say, it is a tribute to the immune system that, despite being totally naive to this, is responding rapidly enough. Again, a lot of this depends on how much of an exposure you get. We have now determined fairly reliably that the major spread comes from, it's person to person through respiratory droplets of, coughing and sneezing of infected people, getting the virus into an uninfected host's mucous membranes, either by touching something, picking it up on a surface, inhaling it from the air where someone just coughed. We know that very, very casual exposures are less likely to lead to infection than repeated and frequent exposures. But again, there's no absolutes, and there's a lot we don't know.
Okay. Somebody asked in the chat, he was saying that he had some symptoms a few weeks back, and he's wondering if there's a test to know if you have been exposed, even though you might be out of the 15-day period.
Okay, so if there will be something, this is not something we need to worry about now, but I know that epidemiologists will be doing this in the future. Let's say you were exposed and you defeated it. You will go through a process known as seroconversion, and that means you've got antibodies circulating in your body to the virus. So what epidemiologists do to determine, how big an exposure there was in a population is they do sample people. Now's not the time. Nobody's doing this. I don't even know if they've developed the testing kits yet for looking for antibodies. I would assume they do, because they had them for SARS. But you can tell if you were exposed. And so far, what we're hearing from the CDC, there's reason to believe if you were exposed, you've got a certain level of immunity. If you were exposed and you seroconverted and cleared it, you've got a certain measure of immunity. If you had the disease, even better. You've made antibodies and you're immune to some extent for a certain period of time. Doesn't mean you absolutely can't get reinfected, but if you get reinfected, you'll have a much milder disease than you did the first time.
Okay. What might we expect of this in the future?
Wow, this is like the $1 million question. And even I've changed my opinions based on papers coming out and what I'm tracking. Let me tell you a story about influenza 1918, okay? Because I look to that, I look to similar outbreaks. Influenza happened in 3 waves. And I know it's been controversial as to whether we can expect things to die down a little in the summer heat. That is what happened with influenza 1918. It had the first wave in spring, March of 1918, kind of died down in the summer of 1918, came back with a vengeance during what we now know to be flu season 1918-19, kind of died down a little bit, and then there was a final wave. I think it was the spring of 1919, and the hot weather, it did kind of, abate a little bit. But as many of my colleagues have pointed out, we have had pandemics start in the summer. MERS, Middle East respiratory syndrome, also a coronavirus. It started in Saudi Arabia, which is 110 degrees Fahrenheit most of the time. So clearly, there's something I'm also thinking is very different from 1918, and the summer might not be as protective as it was, is air conditioning. A lot of this spread could be indoors where things are cooler. So what the CDC is advising people is this could go through the end of the summer pretty severely. I would love it if the heat does help us a little bit, but we cannot count on that for sure. So viral evolution, though, there's another thing. Let me show you something else on my screen. This is another. Okay, so I'm coming back to my slideshow, and I'm going backwards a little. This comes from Peter Attia's COVID-19 website. And this is a wonderful site for podcasts about deeper science on the virus. Peter has some really wonderful experts online with him, and he's giving printed information, he's sharing links, it's fantastic. So this is somebody I recommend for quality information, but let me just show you this. On this x-axis, we have how infectious, how transmittable this is. And I want to call your attention to see where my mouse is circling measles. Measles transmits like there's no tomorrow, okay? The reproductive ratio, and you may have heard that term before, the reproductive ratio refers to how many people you can infect if you're yourself infected. Measles is off the charts with 15 to 20. Now here it's at 15. I've heard people put it as high as 20. It's probably one of the most infectious diseases known to mankind. Chickenpox is also pretty highly infectious. But now here's the important thing. On this y-axis is how fatal is it? How bad is it? Now you notice bird flu is terrible, but it doesn't transmit easily. Our two other coronaviruses, MERS and SARS, MERS doesn't transmit that easily. Ebola doesn't transmit that easily. Now we're starting to look at something, smallpox, very deadly and pretty darn transmissible. 19 and 18 influenza was sort of intermediate. Pretty fatal, but only intermediate reproductive ratio. Like we believe its reproductive ratio is something like 1.2, 1.3. Now the new coronavirus is somewhere in this pink block. We can't say, we don't know exactly yet. Okay, we think it's between 2 and 4, and its fatality, we just are compiling the data now, we're trying to assess it. What we are noticing, the 3.4% overall fatality hides something much different. If you're in the vulnerable population with lung disease or technically over the age of 60, but it gets worse the older you get, those rates are like 10 to 20%. In Korea, rates are below 1%. It also depends on how good your healthcare system is and how well your community is practicing the physical and social distancing that's required. So a lot of things are going to play into that. You can also see that the common cold and the 2009 flu, average, kind of average, transmissibility, but not at all lethal. And the seasonal flu itself, does have quite a few people die every year of seasonal flu. We know that very well. So the key thing we have to do now, our knowledge of what's in this pink box, we don't know where the SARS-2 dot is going to be, where COVID-19 is going to have its dot. The key thing the social distancing is doing right now is helping us to flatten the curve. As I said, we're on this exponential upswing. And now I'm going to share with you something else I use on a daily basis. I'm going to come to my, let's see. I'm trying to get into my, oh, I think it's this one. I think I want to share this screen. Okay. Okay, so nope, that wasn't the right thing. I was doing the wrong thing there. Okay, so I want to try to, let's see. I'm opening up on my computer a dashboard that I like to use. Okay, now I'm going to try to share this. Okay, share. Voila, this helped by putting it on my own screen first, I think. Yeah, so here we are.
Oh,
okay.
great. Yeah.
Yeah, now here's what we want to look at. Today, this dashboard gets updated rather frequently. And I'm looking for, there's lots of different things here. Okay, what we're seeing here, we're looking, this graph, I wonder if I can make this one bigger. Okay, perfect. Okay, now you notice how we're looking at the cases in mainland China. They were increasing like crazy. Luckily, it got under control and now it's plateaued and it'll hopefully be coming down soon. We're looking at the number of people recovered. These people are wonderful. They are now immune hosts that will give us a little tiny bit of herd immunity. But here's the scary thing. In other locations, do you see how this is going up and there's just no stopping it? It's we're in this exponential rise here. Now we want to see that start to flatten like it's done in China. When is that going to happen? We don't know, but it's definitely going to be, it'll happen faster the more we adhere to the social distancing and the recommendations to isolate yourself if you're sick, stay home.
And is that why the flattening happened in China?
Excuse me?
Is this why the flattening happened in China?
Absolutely.
Because of the social distancing.
Absolutely. The Chinese government has the ability to lock down, and they lock down. And they're also using two different communities in China. The outbreak started in Wuhan, and there was even denial and, oh, we don't have a problem. That allowed the disease to take off when we could have maybe even stopped it in China if we had gotten on top of it fast enough. Guangdong, that had suffered from SARS-1, was on top of it far quicker. And you did not see cases exploding in Guangdong the way they did in Wuhan. They imposed, lockdown, stay at home, social distancing much earlier.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we can share these sites and stuff with the.
We're going to share we're going to share all, we're going to put, like, I'll give Kristen a listing like of good sites to go to. Where do I check? Let me show you. I will show you one more thing that's US based. Like that site I just showed you, I believe is at Johns Hopkins University. Now I'm going to share with you another one that's fantastic, and I'm using this one every day. This is for people in the United States. Okay, maybe I didn't do it. Hold on, guys. I think this is, let me get it.
We have all the time in the world. As we are safer at home.
Yeah, it's really true. I mean,
how cool is that? We're not rushing anywhere.
Do you see the COVID tracking project at the top of the screen? This is fantastic. I actually don't know who's doing this. One of my colleagues shared this with me, but you're looking at the cases by state. Okay, Alabama, this many people, 131 tested positive, 1,127 tested negative. And sometimes there's just no information about deaths. Sometimes there is. Okay, like I'm keeping my eye on DC. In DC, we're pretty good. Okay, we've only had one death, 98 confirmed positives, Oh, but only 1,000 people were tested. So that's something where the epicenter places now, we've got a new epicenter, sad to say. It's moved out of Kirkland and it has gone to New York City.
Someone's asking to look at California, so maybe you can cruise.
Oh,
back
sure,
there
I'll go to
next.
California. Yep, I'll go back to there. So in New York, we've got over 10,000 cases and 44 deaths, and 1,600 people are hospitalized. And I have been reading blogs from emergency room physicians in New York telling us the sky is falling. Please follow the instructions and help us. Stay home. Don't. The flattening of the curve means cases will trickle in and our medical system will not exceed its surge capacity. And we don't have a lot of surge capacity to
Yeah, and
begin with.
on that note, Karen, I shared a Facebook Live that a friend of mine who's in Los Angeles and an ER doc, a live that she did yesterday, and it's actually quite amazing what she says, and she just keeps saying, like, this is an act of love, self-love and love for your fellow humans to just stay home. Like, there's no greater act that we can do right now than to stay at home.
Very true. Very true. It's painful. We know there are always trade-offs in this situation. We're looking at economies tanking. I mean, we know it's happening. There are people without income and terrible things. That's bad. I want to keep them alive. I'm hoping that the stimulus and the checks that we're planning to mail to people in the US, I don't want to make light of someone. I personally rely on the gig economy. I make a considerable amount of money through Airbnb. I'm losing $2,000 a month. I bring people into my home, and I do it to add to that, to income that I need. I also love making friends, but I have shut down my Airbnb until June 1st, and I will even reevaluate whether to open it up then, because, well, first of all, I don't want to be sickened, but I also, what if it's me? I could be sickening other people before I realize I have COVID-19,
Yeah.
So we're between the horns of a terrible dilemma. I'm trying to, I have a main job where I collect a paycheck for my main work. And luckily, I'm trying to buy things online, prepay my service providers, do certain things. Our economy in the US is largely services, and 3/4 of it require consumer transactions to function. Economies which are more based on production of food and things like that, like the African economies, might actually be hit a little less hard because there are less services that require like contact between people and so forth. But again, we don't know yet. We
Yeah.
do know that millions of people are now putting in for unemployment compensation, but I want to keep them alive first. I want to keep our healthcare providers not swamped like they are in Italy. I want to keep them healthy. I want to keep them able to deal with the crisis. We didn't run at a lot of excess capacity. No country does. It's too expensive to maintain. So it's very critical we let cases trickle in a manageable way, particularly because you've all heard we're short of personal protective equipment and stuff like that. So we've got to protect our health system and protect each other. And we will come out the other side of this, absolutely. There will be a morning after, so don't worry.
Yeah.
And at that point, we'll figure it out and take the next step.
We're resilient. So what are your thoughts here on California, since somebody asked? We're looking at it.
Okay, this is actually, not too bad. Like, there's only 1,497 as compared to other places, and they've tested 11,250 negative. So, all right. So California isn't, this is a large number of cases. So when you think of it, the more cases there are, the more, even with low reproductive ratios, the more you can start to seed. So we want these numbers to start plateauing, okay? What we're looking for is plateauing. We're not seeing this yet. What you saw in that yellow line in the previous graph is pretty typical. Now, that being said, every community is not equally hard hit, okay? Some communities haven't seen the virus at all. And I think they're probably, many of those places are saying, well, you know, we don't have virus here. Do we really need to shut down stores, and do we need to be as extreme? Absolutely, positively, because it won't take long for that to change radically.
Yeah.
And some places in the interior, let's face it, California, big cities, New York, Boston, DC, we have excellent medical facilities. That isn't so true in all of our rural communities.
Yes.
So this advice is good. It's on point for everyone in this time of coronavirus, and take it super seriously.
Okay. One more question here, and then I'm going to get to more questions that have come in from our folks, our participants. So are there any successful therapies at the moment, and where do we stand with a vaccine?
Okay, very important, super important. Right now, no less than 50 potential therapeutics are being evaluated. You may have seen reports of nucleotide analogs, chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. There are things that have been shown to have a little bit of an effect. And what I want to talk about, let me just say, antivirals never work as well as antibiotics for bacterial infections for one major reason. Viruses are obligate parasites that use our human cellular machinery to replicate. So if you want to shut them down, if you want to kill them, you're killing yourself. So antivirals tend to be, I mean, many of you may have taken them for the flu, Tamiflu. There are a few out there showing a little bit of amelioration. Right now, nothing has been approved for use. There's no magic bullet here, okay? We have none. I mean, HIV is the one thing that we've developed successful antivirals for. And it's a cocktail of 3 drugs that if you stop taking it, you're gonna get sick again. That we know. That is our one major success with antivirals. There are things that will probably come online. The serious thing that will help us here is a vaccination, right? And there are vaccine trials already going on in China. There are several candidate vaccines that may work. There's certain things, I mean, I could go into a lot of detail about this. We have some promising candidates, but some of you might be old enough to remember the 1976 swine flu scare, where we rushed a vaccine out, maybe without adequate testing, and we had some cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome. So we did come to the conclusion that they were potentially vaccine caused. I mean, there were very, very, very few, not a lot.
Syndrome? Exactly.
It's a kind of neurological syndrome that, you know, paralysis and such. It can be it's a very serious disease, and generally it's caused by Campylobacter infection, a bacterial infection. But it can be caused by some viruses itself cause it. And we did determine that there were an excess number of cases when you mass vaccinated for that swine flu. Now, because of that, we're a lot more careful. And again, even those number of cases, the excess cases, it wasn't a lot. And had we had a true pandemic. People were afraid because it was an H1N1, just like 1918. Our science wasn't what it is today. People were worried that we might be revisiting 1918, and they just didn't, we knew how devastating that was. It's a different world today, and even if it had been a pandemic in 1976, I would have still taken that vaccine and taken my chances with the syndrome, because my chances of being harmed by the virus were far, far, far more likely than my chances of having a bad reaction to vaccine. That's like any drug. Honestly, it's always a balance. There are always people who have a slight negative reaction to something, because everybody's different. It's a public health consideration. Now, let me use measles as an example for a vaccination. I had the measles in the early 1960s, and it was the worst disease I ever had. I remember like it was yesterday, being curled up in fetal position on my bed, begging for death. I remember the high fever. I remember the body pains. And I was in the second grade at the time. Shortly thereafter, a vaccine came out, and all of my siblings were spared that misery. Now, childhood vaccines are 90 to 99% effective, right? But you've seen the recent epidemics of measles because people are afraid of getting vaccinations. The concept of herd immunity, I mean, you've all heard that, like if enough people get vaccinated, they'll protect the rest of us. There's truth to that. However, the number of people that need to be inoculated and vaccinated depends on the reproductive ratio. So with measles, when I was sick, did I give it to my 15 of my classmates before I even had those bad symptoms? You need to vaccinate approximately, the estimates go from 93 to 95% of people to have herd immunity to measles. And we had that once upon a time. We don't have that now, and it's breaking out. As we have fewer, as the reproductive ratio lowers, you don't need as many people to get vaccinated to have herd immunity. But if the thing doesn't transmit person to person like tetanus, then it doesn't, there's no such thing as herd immunity. You're protecting yourself by getting a vaccine against the tetanus bacteria.
So that's all great information. Thank you. So there's a question here from Marisa, and she says, what are hospitals giving to current patients who have the virus? Do we know?
I think this is something that is a medical decision. Mostly people who are hospitalized are in those severe and critical categories, and they are getting respiratory support. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they're giving them. I do know that there is a little bit of experimentation, like most of the things being tried are being tried with some of these patients in order to save their lives and just make the difference between a fatal outcome and a serious illness outcome. I don't know what they're getting, and I couldn't say if it's being effective. All I know is what I'm reading in the journals.
Okay, great. I think we've covered social distancing, that it's super important. It was a question that came up, but I think that we are confirmed here. I mean, that is what we should be doing right now. Don't go out unless you have to.
Don't go out unless you have to. Don't give parties. It's not the time to invite a lot of friends over.
So I had a friend. I can ask you a question. I'm sorry, but I had a friend that offered to teach some yoga. That friend might actually be on the call right now. To Adrian and me, and he would do it with some social distancing. Is that something that makes sense to do, or would you think that doesn't make sense to do at this point?
I think personally, my opinion is it doesn't make sense. Do it with Zoom. My yoga studio is doing Zoom classes. So set up your Zoom and he can do the yoga for you that way.
Okay,
same thing.
Good to know. Sorry, Juan.
If you're sick too, the advice the CDC is giving, we know that there have been some case reports that intra-family transmission is pretty high. If you are sick, Try to stay in one room of the house. If you don't have to share the same bathroom, don't share the same things. If you've been diagnosed with COVID-19, or if you're really sick and you think it's COVID-19, try to keep as much distance, even internally to the house, right?
Yeah.
Do the best you can. I mean, by the time you realize you're sick, you may have already exposed everyone. But honestly, distancing as much as possible, even when you're healthy, is very smart. When you're actively ill, try to be even more extreme in the distancing and wipe down things the sick person touches. People who are caring for the sick person should practice as much distance as they possibly can, consistent with their caregiving.
As a single parent, that's frightening to me. All of that, quite honestly. And I don't like to live in fear. I've really spent a lot of my time trying to process through it and do so successfully. I've had some pretty serious illnesses as a single mom. I remember back in 2008. Yeah, it was 2008, end of 2008. Adrian got the rotavirus, and then
Oh,
I got
that's
the
a
rotavirus. We
yeah.
both had it, and it's so contagious that I was unable to have anybody come into my home to help us, and it was quite challenging with a 6-month-old. So
Yeah, it's challenging, but honestly, the good news, and I think no one should forget this. The good news is most people are not going to get seriously ill. Most cases, the vast majority, are mild and moderate, and people are recovering at home.
mhm.
And they're distancing, and even not every family member will necessarily become ill, and if they do, they'll probably recover at home. So the good news is that this isn't SARS, this isn't MERS, it isn't H1N1. The at-risk populations, even their fatality rate is only 10 to 20%. Even the majority of them are recovering. So at least with our current knowledge. So again, keep an eye on yourself. If you're any severe respiratory distress is a medical emergency to be responded to instantly. And then one day at a time. I think I like to use the word physical distancing more than social distancing, because social support is more important than ever.
Yeah.
And I think, being on Zooms and on Marco Polos and Facebook Messenger, I mean, I think all of these are just wonderful. And it's helping me feel connected to people. I've been sick myself. A few days ago, I wasn't feeling well. I mean, I don't know what I have, but I'm at home. I'm not getting worse. My symptoms aren't progressing. I'm rather improving. So probably had an ordinary flu or an ordinary common cold, which, by the way, we have coronaviruses that cause the common colds and don't bother us at all. There are 7 human coronaviruses. Only 3 of them are problematic: SARS-1, SARS-2, and MERS. The rest give us that common cold that's annoying. And my hope is that over the years, the virus, what many people don't know is many of the flu viruses that circulate every year are descendants of 1918, but they've adapted to us and become more mild. And I'm hoping that all the bad coronaviruses, they're new viruses, they're new to the human host over time. And I mean, this is centuries, time frames, not a decade. That over time, they may become as mild as the other coronaviruses. However, we'll probably have a vaccine, not for the general public immediately. An effective vaccine will go to healthcare providers and first responders first, which is absolutely appropriate. Probably the soonest it'll be available for the general public is a year to 18 months. But I'm really confident based on who I know is working on it, what they're doing, and what we've learned about vaccines for coronaviruses. We don't have many. I mean, there is a vaccine for a cat coronavirus. If you've got cats and have ever lost a cat to feline infectious peritonitis, you know all about coronaviruses, and I lost one of my all-time favorite cats to that. And he seeded an epidemic. I had 5 cats at the time. They all caught it from him and all died. And there is a vaccine for it, but it's, not terribly effective.
That's terrible. I'm sorry to hear.
Yeah, poor Mokins. He was a wonderful cat.
So let's go to some questions, because I'm cognizant of people's time, even though we've got lots of time. I know that I only have until 1:30 because I have another call. So let's try to get through as many questions as we can. Eric Gaba from Ghana asks, I have read different thoughts regarding COVID-19, such as it being a biological weapon that was created and intentionally realized into society. Others say it was in animals all these while, but found its way into human DNA. What is the truth about the spread?
Oh boy, I've been hearing a lot of that bioweapon conspiracy theory. Honestly, Eric, there's no evidence. Like I sometimes joke that we humans aren't smart enough to make a good virus. Nature is way better than that. Now, not to underestimate, both the U.S. and the former Soviet Union were in the business of bioweaponry, and in fact, I'll tell you, if historically in the U.S. it was George Merck, as in Merck Pharmaceuticals, who advised President Harry Truman after dropping the bombs in Japan in World War II. He advised Harry Truman to get into biological weapons because they were more humane. Now, I don't know how he had that idea, but we had a program in the US. We were working more on more lethal things. What people tried to bioweaponize with varying degrees of success was primarily smallpox because it's more deadly. There's no indication. We know that these viruses are in bat reservoirs. We have detected them in intermediate hosts. We have no sense that there's any kind of bioweapons lab in Wuhan and it got free. This is kind of more the stuff of Hollywood, frankly, than the reality. Not that it can't be done, but it's very similar to 2 other things that came out of animals, and I have no evidence and no reason to believe this is bioweaponry.
I think it's interesting that you say that nature is better at creating.
Oh, nature's far better than human beings. We don't need to do it. We just take what nature did, right?
Right, but in terms of the smallpox, you have the historical experience of what happened with the Native Americans, right? And
oh, absolutely. Smallpox, before the vaccine, smallpox devastated us. Yeah. It was that smallpox is the virus that has killed more of our species than any other one. And what do you think is number 2? Influenza.
Wow. So another question, this is from Teresa. How long would we need to be quarantined as shelter in place or even lockdown in order to meaningfully slow or stop the spread of the disease?
Oh boy, such a great question. And, the honest answer is we don't know. We're evaluating it step by step. The World Health Organization, even this morning, called for more stringent measures in certain places. Because every community is different, every country is different, and the better we do at it, the faster this will end. You saw the graph for Wuhan. In Wuhan, the first cases appeared in November. It appeared to peak, when it started. Like, what's a little tricky there is our diagnostic criteria changed. This was brand new. We had changed how we were diagnosing it so that what would have been a case before might not have been a case. It was all presumptive diagnoses. But now, look, here we are in March, and it's plateauing, and the Chinese are starting to see, reductions. They're having days with no new cases coming up. So that went from November until March with really extreme quarantining. But they also had 81,000 cases. So this just goes to show you that locking down can work. And the better you lock down, the faster it'll stop. I've heard people at the CDC talk about potentially even to the end of summer, but the honest answer is we don't know. DC has been shut down. We only have 98 cases. Our mayor shut things down a while back. She originally shut it down till the end of March, and now she extended it to the end of April. So we'll see. You know, we're taking it one step at a time, and it will depend on how hard hit your community and your state is. But the more extreme we go now, the faster that day will come.
So stay at home. That goes back to just stay at home. I have a question for you, because actually, one of the things we have to do is we have to go out to buy food. I'm minimizing. I'm one of those people that likes to go to the grocery store every day, like just to pop in for fun. And I'm not doing that now. I did a big shop on Wednesday morning. I really bought most of what we needed. And because I'm a bright line eater, to all those bright line eaters out there, in bright line eating, we eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, which is great from a health perspective. I eat 20 ounces of vegetables and 12 ounces of fruit every day. And so, as you might imagine, if you eat that much fruit and vegetable, it goes quickly. So I did go yesterday to the farmer's market in Santa Monica. I was super impressed with how they were monitoring. First of all, not that many people were there. I knew it was open because I'd listened to our city manager is doing a video every day, and he mentioned that the farmers markets were open. So I went. I thought going to a farmers market would be better than going to the grocery store. It just feels cleaner, like less likely to get something. And they had a really great setup in terms of social distancing. They had tape, and so everyone had to be 6 feet apart. They measured it. I don't know. What are your thoughts about going to the farmers market?
Yeah, I'm going out. I mean, let's face it, we have to go. My farmers market has literally shut down. So I was going to that, and I think this is the first week it shut down completely. Over time, fewer and fewer farmers were showing up. But the advantage to that is it's well ventilated, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in a poorly ventilated place, your exposure to these respiratory droplets could be higher. But I've seen my supermarket, my Trader Joe's is now putting tape on the floor. They're insisting on a queue outside. They're only letting so many people into the store at once. So, I mean, that's an essential thing. Again, you don't want to shop daily anymore, but I'm trying to balance it where Trader Joe's is recommending don't take more than 2 cans of beans or 2 packages of frozen vegetables because other people need it too. So in the early days, I walked into my Trader Joe's at 9 p.m. when it's usually dead. And it was mobbed and people were cleaning out everything. It looked like, World War III had hit and people were hoarding and stockpiling for forever. That's changed, so now it's very organized, and I feel a lot better about doing that. And, I've really minimized my shopping to like you, once a week or even less. I bought a little bit of extra beans and frozen stuff, so I don't need to shop a lot. But farmers market, I would go there. They're as organized, like be it a farmers market, be it a grocery store. You've got to go there, and I would go to either. One thing I have heard is that there is no evidence of it transmitting through food per se. I mean, if someone coughs on an apple or something, well, then that's the same as coughing in your face, right? If you're putting the apple in your mouth. But realistically, we're still evaluating the fecal oral route, and we know that was big for SARS. That was a very important means for SARS. So how extreme that'll be. We're wondering if that might have been what was doing it in cruise ships, because there's no evidence that it goes through the ventilation. It's not what we call a quote unquote airborne virus, which can get in the ventilation system and go transmit that way. We don't think so. That is, of course, still being evaluated.
Mandy had asked her a question. She says that you answered her question already. She had emailed me. And she asked as a follow-up here in the chat, she said, my question would be to please share most reliable sites for news for us to follow the virus, and that she would also love to know the most trustworthy real-time resources.
Oh, I can tell you right away the ones I'm using the CDC, I'm using the World Health Organization, and because I can evaluate them, I'm using the New England Journal of Medicine and Biomed Central, which is the US government. It's the NIH repository for scientific articles.
And we can also, we can send those details.
We'll send those links, but CDC is making videos. They have regular briefings. World Health Organization, you can even Google it up as the first hit. The sites I showed you that I go to look at the caseloads and how many people are infected, they're wonderful. I mean, I would tell you, I am constantly battling crazy stuff. People are sending me saying, can this really work? If it's your cousin's ex-girlfriend on Twitter, I would tend not to believe that. You know, some of these crazy things people are saying to me. Here's what I really saw. Someone told me they saw this, that you should take boiling water and gargle take boiling water, put lemon in it and gargle for 2 minutes. And I'm saying, oh my God, if someone even tries that, they're going to scald the inside of their throat and hurt themselves badly. I'm hearing people trying to blowing hot air into their noses with a hairdryer. Holy cow. I mean, that's a way to maybe send virus deep into your lungs where it's the most dangerous. I mean, what people are doing could literally hurt them badly. And I don't know where they're getting some of these ideas, but don't believe all these wacko things. I'm not saying that some of them less wacko, like somebody pointed out something that we should emphasize: a good healthy lifestyle, good nutrition, getting enough sleep, reducing your stress, getting exercise. I'm using YouTube videos and going to Zoom yoga classes. You can get exercise in the house. You know, I have my own ballet bar here. I was going to sign up for ballet class, maybe learn something new online. They're doing it by Zoom. So the healthier you are, just the better it's going to be, you know.
I agree. I'm trying to get a few more questions in before we hit 1:30. A question from Carolyn, who's my sister-in-law. She says, she's asking, if I get sick, I feel like one of these questions might be answered already, but if I get sick, what medications or homeopathic remedies do you recommend? And I don't know that you can recommend those. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Okay.
Like you're breaking up on my end. So what was
Okay, sorry about that.
Question?
Okay. So Carolyn says, if I get sick, what medications or homeopathic remedies do you recommend?
Why don't you type it in the chat box, because I can't get it from you. Okay, you're back. Let's try now.
I'm here now. Okay. You know,
Yeah.
so I actually asked Adrian to get off of the internet because I feel like maybe there's some sort of weird, you know, thing going on. He left.
Just there's a lot of load on your
Fortnite, I think.
Okay. Well, he could be.
Hold
Maybe
on,
he's taking your connect. Yeah, he's taking your bandwidth. Okay.
The war for internet.
Yeah, because I see some other people are hearing you breaking up too. So, okay,
Okay.
what was Carolyn's question?
Okay, so hopefully that's better. It's interesting because my 5G is not, oh, I'm going to switch to 5G right now. If I fall out, I'll come back in.
Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Okay, there you are.
Okay,
Have you got to
you got
5G?
me? Okay, yeah, I'm in
I
5G
can hear
now.
you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I don't know why the 5G went away. Okay, so I'll ask the question again. If I get sick, what medications or homeopathic remedies do you recommend?
Okay, this is another thing. I don't have any recommendations. That is not where I operate. And to my knowledge, there are no scientifically validated things we can say about this yet. In general, viruses have what we give is what we call supportive care. There isn't a medical cure. There isn't any specific thing, for these mild and moderate cases. You just kind of wait it out until you're healthy, just keep up your nutrition as best you can, just be resting, drink a lot of fluids. Those are all general good pieces of advice to do when you're sick. That could change. And there may be things, because of the severity, people will be examining the herbal remedies. There is nothing I know of that has an evidence base at this time. Doesn't mean there isn't something, I'm just unaware of it.
Okay, and then there's a question specifically about ibuprofen. I know that you and I had talked about that. Do you want to give what your thoughts are on that?
Okay, like the ibuprofen, there was an announcement, I don't know which day it was, one day bleeds into the next very easily these days. The health minister of France said ibuprofen can exacerbate the virus. And then the World Health Organization immediately came out and said there's no reason to say that. Now, going back, there is no official recommendation that you shouldn't take ibuprofen. And I'll just tell you some of my personal choices. I don't use those things. If your fever gets too high, you've got to take care of it and get it down. I mean, you can cause brain damage and seizures. Those are medical emergencies that you should definitely get on top of. But a slight fever, I usually don't treat that, because you have to think, is this the body's way of defeating the virus? And often, it is. So there are three things, like we've talked about this in the viral pathogenesis field. Certain symptoms, mostly your symptoms come from your immune response. And sometimes those symptoms aid and abet the virus, okay? You want to stop those symptoms. Some symptoms are there to defeat the virus. You don't want to stop those symptoms. And some symptoms are neutral. And those symptoms you can treat or not treat depending on how disruptive you find them and how your relationship with over-the-counter medications to start with. Yeah, again, if you use ibuprofen and it's fine by you, the official advice now is you don't have to fear it. There is interesting results from a number of years ago that shows that naproxen, which is another non-steroidal anti-inflammatory, can actually reduce viral loads. It can stop viral replication. What's really complex, and this is now just general science I want to share with you. We often talk about inflammation as a universally bad thing. Pro-inflammatory processes play a very important role at containing viral spread early on in an infection. The interferon type 1 system, initiates a signaling cascade that shuts down viral replication as much as it can. Now, the viruses know how to override that system, many of them, and they're trying to do that. So it's sort of a battle. So in the early stages of infection, a pro-inflammatory response can be very protective. In the later stages, the critical and severe, what we believe is causing this acute respiratory distress is a very strong pro-inflammatory response in the lower lungs where gas exchange is happening, and that can be life-threatening. So much of this depends on timing. All the drugs, ibuprofen, naproxen, aspirin, all of them, they have multiple effects in the body. And the anti-inflammatory effect that you think is causing something to happen, it might be something totally different. We don't even know all the things that these guys can do. If aspirin were coming up to be approved for release today, it would never make it through the FDA. So.
All right. Oh, there's so many great questions. Lisa Blackwell asks a question. She has her bestie has OCD and wants to know if we should change clothes when we get home.
Oh, I've heard that, all I'll say, again, we know there can be fomite transmission. It is possible that somebody could cough on you and you could have virus on your clothes. Whether that is liable to lead to a spread, we don't know. The answer simply is we don't know. And if your friend is a little paranoid and wants you to change when you get home, I'm assuming this is a roommate, can it hurt? I'm kind of taking the approach is if it's a harmless thing, it will make someone feel better. Even if I don't need to be doing it, I'm going to do it. Okay, so there's no scientific basis. We do know, that interestingly, the more porous the surface, we're really having a hard time even measuring how long viruses can live on those because they're porous, they move around, it's more complex than measuring virus on a hard surface. Even trying to measure how long viruses last on cardboard, the group that did those experiments says don't trust that data, it's too variable. We can't quite nail that down. So that's for you to decide.
There's some other questions here that we haven't hit. I think that a lot of them we've already determined. Cindy asks, how do I determine whether it is safe to have my family over for dinner? We are over 60 and they are 5 to 8 years old.
I think you know the answer to that. So I mean, that's
don't have them over. I'm sure you guys have seen some of this on social media. One of my friends who lives in London had her birthday yesterday and they did a birthday party via Zoom.
Exactly.
As much as we want to see them, I've been thinking about my little nephew who I miss so much and I'd love to see him, but it just, it doesn't make sense to see other people if you don't have to see other people.
Actually, someone in my Gideon Games group in BLE, she told me she is of a particular religion that they do a yearly fast and they end their fast with a feast. And her family had a virtual feast where everybody was kind of on Zoom. I mean, such is life in the days of the coronavirus. I mean, things have changed. And the more we can stay alone, stay indoors, not congregate in large groups, particularly if you've got, some of the people you want to bring into these groups are in the most vulnerable populations. And people are asking, should I let my grandchildren see their grandparents? Yeah. Let's talk about Zoom and WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger, FaceTime. Okay, it's not the same, but I want them alive longer, is what I'll say. I want everybody healthy.
Like in the immediate, it's not worth it for the long term. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Vicky asks, and I'm just gonna maybe take one question. It's 1:29 right now. I've just pushed my next Zoom call for 10 minutes so I can get through a few more questions. If that's okay with you, Karen.
Oh, sure. No
I
problem.
mean, I know it's a lot to have to keep this energy going. Vicky asked, because people aren't being tested, how do we know how many people have it and have died from it?
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't exactly know. And this is why we'll probably never have certain numbers, because some people may be dying of, they particularly people who were quite old, over 80 is a high risk group, and they may have had so many other underlying problems. The coronavirus could have just been what tipped them over the edge. We'll never know, because we aren't doing as much testing. We just won't know. Testing is ramping up. Over time, we should know better. We have methods for doing estimations based on countries that do better testing and knowing when we have the exact reproductive ratio. And we will be able to make some pretty decent estimates, but you're right. Absolute knowledge of how many are truly infected. Let me just say, for 1918 influenza, we had much less good reporting in those days, and we don't even have the numbers. We know the population of the Earth was 1.2 billion, 1.2, 1.3. Estimates of people who died go anywhere from 20 to 100 million. We don't know. Estimates of how many people were infected run approximately 25% of the population, and most of that is extrapolated from what we learned later. We don't know. There are people who say that every human being on the planet was exposed. We don't know. We'll be a lot better when all is said and done on COVID-19. But yeah, there's definitely more cases than we think, and there are probably more deaths from coronavirus, from COVID-19, than we're aware of.
There's a lot of people saying thank you. And Marisa
Oh, you're very welcome.
has asked if because this information, everything's moving so quickly, is it possible for you to, would you be willing to do this again another time?
Sure, why not? I'm doing it. I'm doing this 24/7 with different groups and privately. And as we know more, as things change, like things are changing, you're right, on a daily basis. Some of the things I've just told you, I want to add the disclaimer. This is to the best of our knowledge today and to the best of my scientific understanding and interpretation. Things are evolving fast, and I'm doing some other things with a different group. I'm also doing kind of a virology 101 series. And if you're on Marco Polo and you want to be added to the virology 101, this is much more like science and basic science that I'm sharing. Obviously applied to this, but applied to other viruses. If you want to learn more, what is a virus? I will say,
in the follow-up email that we send, we'll give people an option.
We'll tell you how you can join in, how you can opt in. But don't forget, this is an RNA virus, not DNA. Okay.
So, Karen, thank you so much for doing this. It was so informative, and I think everyone's really grateful for you to have spent the time and shared your expertise. Thank you to everybody who is here, and I think it's amazing. Almost everyone that came stayed, which is really incredible. Maybe it has something to do with us all sheltering at home.
Like we're all stuck
sheltering
at home.
In place.
And we're all talking about coronavirus.
There's a lot of noise out there. So, and I think that for me at least, and you guys can share, as a coach, I love to do this, like share what your greatest insight was today. Like, what did you learn the most from this conversation, and share it in the chat box so we can see. I'm curious, what was your biggest insight? I would say, I don't see anyone going on yet, but share your insight in the chat box. My insight was, I think I knew this already, but it was all confirming. I think what everything kind of comes back to in terms of what we can do And right, there's this whole idea, and we've heard Susan Pierce Thompson and Bright Line Eating talk about it. We've heard a million different people talking about this, is that anxiety is heightened in relationship to how much we are in or out of control, right? And so the one thing that we can absolutely be in control of in this circumstance is to stay at home and to not go, that's really all that we can do. Like what, and Juan had asked to talk more about this a bit, and eat well. I mean, one of the things that makes me so happy, and we will send information about Bright Line Eating too, about being a Bright Line eater, is that I already eat so many fruits and vegetables. Like I know what I'm putting in my body is healing my body and not hurting it, you know, and not going to like things that have lots of sugar and flour in them is helping this process. So I think those are the things we can control. We control staying at home. We can control eating well. We control exercising at home or maybe taking walks. Let's see. I just want to share a bit in terms of Mandy said, "You're so generous with your time today and grateful I got included. Thank you. It really did help hearing more science-based information. Stay happy and healthy, everyone." Teresa said, "Perspective on how the virus compares to others and that we will get through this. Also, we may be at home for months before life returns to somewhat normal measures." Yeah. Nicole said, "I'm grateful for the science, but also the faith of where science is today and medicine versus other major outbreaks and pandemics. Trust in all the smarties out there." Yeah.
Oh, they're out there and they're amazing. I'm telling you. Just knowing who's on the case has me feeling very good.
Marisa says her biggest takeaways are Zoom, yoga, healthy food, and stay home. And Luann said she's so grateful. She's another BLEer. Greatest community ever. She said, so grateful for being included today. And Juan says, "Thank you for doing this. This is very informative. And I love your calm voices." Oh, excellent. Okay, so love all of you. Please, if you have any questions, we will send an email. I think you have my email already. You can send questions. Oh, Eric says, "My takeaways are eat well, stay home." Thanks, Karen. So yeah. I think we all know what we need to do.
We do.
That's it. Stay home, eat well, right? I mean, do what the leaders have been telling us to do, right? Pretty much. I don't suggest going to the actual drive-thrus if you can help it. And I'll leave it at that. Okay. So love you all. Okay. Please let us know. I'll also include Karen's contact info. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer any questions. And we will hopefully maybe see you soon with another one of these.
Yeah. And maybe there'll be good news. You know, things change fast.
Yeah.
Things could get better faster. It's all, you know, it's all one day at a time, one day at a time. So love you all. Glad to have been able to share. So have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.